This is what's actually there, Bobby. You're half of nothing. Dale slid the paper across the table with 2 fingers. The way a man deals a card he already knows will win. 1 printed page, a bank logo at the top, a balance near the bottom with a number so small it looked like a typo. The dining room went quiet, not the comfortable kind. His brother Wayne sat to his right with a fork still in his hand, and the corner of his mouth lifted just a little, the way it did when he watched somebody else get the bad news. The lawyer, a soft-spoken man named Pruitt, who Dale had brought to a family dinner like a side dish, looked down at his plate of pot roast and found it very interesting. Roberta Voss did not pick up the page. She had a cup of tea in front of her, and the tea was still warm, and she had a rule about tea. So she lifted it and she drank, and she set it down on the saucer without a sound. 58 years old, hands steady as a level. The kitchen clock ticked behind her. Somewhere outside, the lake wind came up off Erie and pushed against the storm windows of the brick twin on Cherry Street, the way it had every winter for 18 years. "You'll be fine," Dale said, gentler now, performing gentle. He reached over and patted the back of her hand twice, the way you pat a dog that doesn't understand the car is going to the vet. Half of nothing is still nothing, but you'll land on your feet. You always do. Wayne almost laughed, caught it behind his napkin. "That's the joint account," Dale went on, to the room, to Pruitt, to the audience he'd built. 18 years of marriage, and that's the honest number. I'm not hiding anything. I just want this clean. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The church bulletin from St. Paul's sat under a magnet on the refrigerator behind them, and on top of that refrigerator sat a steel filing box, gray, dented at one corner, that every person at that table had walked past 1,000 times and never once opened. Now, here is the part Dale Voss did not know, sitting there so pleased with his single page and his soft voice and his brother's smirk. By the end of this, every dollar he hid will have a name written next to it, and the name will be mine. Let me take you back. To understand what happened at that table, you have to understand the woman drinking the tea, and you have to understand that she had been counting other people's money, by hand, for 31 years. Roberta Voss had worked reconciliation at a savings bank on State Street since she was 26 years old. Reconciliation is the unglamorous heart of a bank. It is the desk where the numbers the bank thinks it has are checked against the numbers that actually exist, line by line, penny by penny, until the 2 columns agree or somebody finds out why they don't. For 3 decades, she sat at that desk and made the world's money tell the truth. A 2-cent discrepancy would keep her past closing. She found errors that had been buried for years. She had a green pen and a ruler and a way of running her finger down a column that her younger co-workers used to imitate when they thought she couldn't see. And she could see, and she didn't mind. At home, she kept her own books the same way. 18 years, in a cloth-bound ledger with a green cover gone soft at the spine. Every bill, every deposit, every transfer in and out of the Voss household logged by hand in her small, even script. The mortgage, the gas, the boy's braces back when there was a boy in the house, before he grew up and moved to Cleveland and learned to call on Sundays, the new roof in 2014, the water heater. She wrote it all down, and at the end of every month she balanced it against the bank statements, and the 2 columns agreed because she made them agree. Dale thought it was a joke. That was the thing. He thought it was funny. "Bobby still does math like it's 1985, he'd say at dinners, at the lake house his golf friends rented, at Wayne's place on the 4th of July, and people would chuckle because the way he said it invited them to. She's got a little book, like a pioneer. I keep telling her, 'Honey, the bank does this for you now. There's an app.' And Roberta would smile a small smile and let him have it, because she had stopped a long time ago, needing Dale Voss to understand her, and because the little book was not for him. The little book was for her mother. Della Macklin had died 30 years back, in a county hospital bed, in a room where the decisions about her own life were made by a man across the table, who held a pen she wasn't allowed to touch. Roberta was 28. She had stood in the hallway and listened to her father, a man who loved his wife in his own narrow way, and still could not imagine that she might want to know what she owned, sign forms with an X where Della's name should have been, because somewhere in their marriage he had decided that knowing was his job and Della's job was to be fine, to land on her feet, to trust that half of nothing was still something if a good man was holding it. Della Macklin had not been a foolish woman. She'd been a quiet one, which is a different thing entirely, and the people around her had made the mistake of confusing the two. At the funeral, a teller from the credit union on West 26th had come up to Roberta in the receiving line, an older woman she didn't recognize, and pressed both her hands and said, "Your mother set me up with my first account in my own name. Wouldn't take no. Said a woman has to have a door that's only hers." And then the line moved, and the woman was gone. And Roberta did not learn until much later how many doors her mother had quietly opened in this town. But she learned the lesson that day, in the hallway, listening to a pen scratch out an X. She made herself a promise, the kind you make at 28 that you spend the rest of your life keeping without telling anyone you made it. No one would ever again decide what Roberta was allowed to know, so she kept her books. And she married Dale Voss 2 years later, a salesman then, charming in the way of men who are good at being liked, a man who shook hands like he was doing you a favor. And for a long time, it was a real marriage, or close enough to one. And she let herself relax into it the way you relax into a chair you've been told is sturdy. The trouble, when it came, did not arrive with a slammed door. It arrived as a discrepancy. 2 years before that dinner, so when Roberta was 56, she had been balancing the household ledger against the joint account statement on a Tuesday night in October, with the radio low and a second cup of tea, and the columns did not agree. Not by 2 cents, by $400, a withdrawal she had not made and could not place. She frowned at it, the way she'd frowned at 10,000 small wrongnesses across 31 years, and she did what she always did. She wrote it down in the margin with a small star beside it and a date, and she waited to see if it would explain itself. It did not explain itself. The next month there was another one. 600 this time, moved out of the joint account on a day Dale had told her he was at a sales conference in Pittsburgh. The month after that, nothing. Then 900. The amounts had no rhythm she could name, and that was what bothered her most, because Roberta Voss believed that all money had a rhythm if you watched it long enough, and money with no rhythm was money somebody was hiding. She did not confront him, understand that about her. A lesser anger would have marched into the den and waved the statement and demanded. Roberta had buried that kind of anger 30 years ago in a hallway. What she had, instead, was patience. And patience, in the hands of a woman who reconciles, is not a soft thing. It is a blade you sharpen slowly. She started a second ledger, a small one, the size of a checkbook, that she kept not in the steel box on the fridge, but folded inside a recipe card for peach cobbler in the kitchen drawer, because the safest place to hide a thing is inside something nobody believes is interesting. And in that little ledger, she logged every starred discrepancy, every odd date, every number with no rhythm, and beside each one, she wrote what Dale had told her he was doing that day. The columns of his life and the columns of his story stopped agreeing too. There was the spare room for one, the small bedroom at the back of the house that had been their son's, and then a sewing room, and then, about a year and a half ago, a room Dale had quietly started calling storage and had quietly put a lock on. A little brass-keyed knob, the kind you buy at the hardware store on a Saturday and install before your wife asks why. "Just my tax stuff and the old business files," he said when she mentioned it once. "Light, passing through. You don't want to dig through that mess." And she had said all right and filed it the way she filed everything, with a small star and a date. There was the phrase, too, the one he let slip at the kitchen counter on a gray afternoon in early spring, when the divorce was a thing they had started saying out loud, but not yet a thing with lawyers and printed pages. They had been talking, almost civil, about how it would all get divided, and Roberta had said something about wanting her own accounts kept separate, kept in her own name, and Dale had smiled the smile he used on customers and said, "Honey, your maiden name's just paperwork now. It doesn't mean anything. It's just paperwork." He'd meant it as comfort, the way a man means comfort when he is telling you that you are smaller than you think. Roberta had finished her tea before she answered. That was the rule. She set the cup down and she looked at him. This man she had balanced a household around for 18 years, and she said, "You're probably right, Dale." And she'd watched something in his face relax, and she had thought, very quietly, behind a face that gave away nothing, paperwork is the only thing in this world I have never once lost track of. Because here is what Dale Voss had forgotten in the years he spent laughing about the little green book. 30 years ago, before she died in that hospital bed, Della Macklin had done one last quiet thing for her daughter. She had walked into the credit union on West 26th, and she had opened a savings account in Roberta's name, her maiden name, Roberta Macklin, the name from before there was ever a Voss, and she had signed the card herself, and she had told the girl behind the counter, so a Voss can't ever touch it. Then she had taken Roberta aside in the parking lot in the lake wind and told her to keep her own books all her life, even when a man told her not to, especially then. Roberta had never closed that account. It had sat there, nearly forgotten, the way a door left unlocked sits there for 30 years. And it was about to matter more than Dale Voss could possibly imagine. But she didn't know all of that yet, sitting at the dinner table while he patted her hand. She only knew the discrepancies. She only knew the starred margins, and the locked room, and the phrase about paperwork, and the cold certainty, built up 2 years' worth of Tuesday nights, that somewhere in this house, a man was moving money in the dark and calling it protecting what he earned. So when Dale slid that single page across the table and said, "You're half of nothing," and his brother smirked, and the lawyer studied his pot roast, Roberta Voss did not argue. She drank her tea. She set down the cup. She said, "All right, Dale," in a voice low and even and entirely calm, and she thanked Pruitt for coming, and she carried the dishes to the sink. And then, when the house was empty, and the lake wind was the only sound on Cherry Street, she pulled a kitchen chair to the refrigerator and she climbed up and she took down the steel filing box. The box was heavier than it looked, the way honest things often are, and she carried it down with both hands and set it on the kitchen table where Dale's single printed page still lay face up under the hanging light. She did not move the page. She set the steel box down beside it, and for a moment the two things sat there together. His one sheet and her 18 years, and the difference between them was the whole story. If anyone had been there to read it, no one was there. That was fine. Roberta Voss had done her best work alone for 31 years. She opened the lid. Inside, standing on edge like books on a shelf, were the ledgers. Not one. A row of them, the oldest at the back with its cover frayed soft, the newest at the front, all of them green, all of them filled in the same small, even hand, a marriage written in numbers. Under the ledgers, in labeled folders she had kept the way the bank taught her to keep things, were the statements. Every joint account statement the bank had ever mailed to the brick twin on Cherry Street, going back further than the lake had any right to remember. She made a pot of tea. She turned the radio to the low station, and she sat down to reconcile. People think reconciliation is adding. It is not adding. It is matching. It is taking what one party swears is true and laying it beside what another party swears is true and walking your finger down both columns until either they agree or one of them confesses. Roberta laid the bank's 2 years beside her own 2 years, and she walked her finger down and she listened for the confession. It came on the third night. She had already found the starred withdrawals again, the ones she'd logged in the little cobbler ledger, 400 and 600 and 900 with no rhythm, but laid against the full statements, in order, with her glasses down on her nose and the tea gone cold beside her. The rhythm appeared. It had been there all along. It was not random at all. The money left the joint account in irregular amounts on irregular days. Yes, but every single departure landed within a day or two as a deposit into one other account. The same destination, over and over. An account number she did not recognize, at a bank 2 suburbs over in Mill Creek, where the Vosses did not bank and never had. Dale's shadow account, the place the household's blood had been quietly drained to, a little at a time, for 2 years, while he stood at dinners and called her a pioneer. $214,000, 18 years of 2 careful people, and a roof and a boy raised and sent to Cleveland, and 1,000 small refusals to spend, gone 2 suburbs over into a number with Dale's fingerprints all over it and her name nowhere on it. The next morning, she drove to the credit union on West 26th. She had not been inside in years. It had new carpet and a coffee machine in the corner, and a young man at the first window. But at the far window, where the long-time customers drifted by habit, sat a woman Roberta's own age with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a nameplate that said Okafor. Roberta took the chair across from her and laid down the old passbook she had dug out of the back of the steel box, the one with Roberta Macklin printed on the inside cover in a typeface they had stopped using before her son was born. "I'd like to know if this is still open," Roberta said. "I expect it's been closed 30 years, and I'm a foolish woman for asking." Mrs. Okafor took the passbook. She did not open it right away. She looked at the name on the cover, and then she looked up at Roberta over the reading glasses, and something passed across her face that was not surprise. It was closer to recognition. "Macklin," Mrs. Okafor said. "You're Della's girl." Roberta's hands, steady as a level for 58 years, went still in a new way. "I am Mrs." Okafor turned to her screen and typed, slow and certain, and the longer she typed, the more her mouth softened. "It was never closed," she said. "Honey, it was never closed. It's been sitting here this whole time." She turned the monitor a few degrees so Roberta could see it, the way you turn a thing towards someone you have decided to trust. And it's not empty either. There's activity. Recent activity. Everything you ever set to auto-deposit, your old paychecks, that pension rooting you started, it still comes through here. You never moved it. You built a second life on a road you forgot you paved. "I didn't set up auto-deposits to this account," Roberta said. "I set those up against the joint account. You set them up against a routing number," Mrs. Okafor said gently. "Routing numbers don't care what you call the account on your end. They go where they were told to go a long time ago." She tapped the screen, and they were told a long time ago. Roberta sat with that. The lake wind pushed at the credit union's front glass. Somewhere behind her, the coffee machine hissed. "Why would my mother?" she started, and stopped, because she already half knew. Mrs. Okafor took off the reading glasses and let them fall to the beaded chain. "I'll tell you something, and then I'll get your statements," she said. 40 years ago, I came to this country with a husband who held the money and a baby on my hip and not one piece of paper with my own name on it. I came into a bank like this one, and I was turned away from 3 windows. The 4th window was a woman doing what your mother did everywhere she went. Della Macklin walked me through, opening my first account, my own, in my own name, and she would not take no, and she told me, "A woman has to have a door that's only hers." She slid the passbook back across the counter. "I never forgot it. I took this job partly because of it, and I have opened that same door for more women in this town than I could count for you." She held Roberta's eyes. "Your mother left a lot of doors unlocked, Mrs. Voss. This is just the one with your name on it." Roberta drove home with the statements in a manila envelope on the passenger seat, and she did not open them until the kitchen, until the tea, until the rules. Then she opened them, and that was when the trouble inside the trouble began, because the maiden name account was not empty, just as Mrs. Okafor had said. There were the small, honest streams, the old pension rooting, the trickle she'd forgotten she'd ever set in motion. She could account for those. She matched each one to a faint pencil note in the very back of the oldest green ledger and felt the quiet satisfaction of 2 columns agreeing. And then she found the transfer she had not made. It was not small. It had come in 11 months ago, a clean 5 figures, from a source line abbreviated down to almost nothing, and there was no star for it in any of her books because she had never logged it, because she had never known it happened. She sat forward. She ran her finger back up the column and down again. She checked the date against her own life, against the little cobbler ledger, against the wall calendar with its church bulletin reminders, and there was nothing on that day that was hers. She had not moved that money. Dale could not have moved it. He did not know this account drew breath. Someone else had put money into her mother's account. A hand she could not name had reached into the one door that was supposed to be only hers, and instead of taking, it had given. For the first time in the whole long, patient siege, Roberta Voss did not know whose hand it was, and not knowing for a woman whose entire dignity was built on knowing was a colder thing than anything Dale had slid across a dinner table. She went back to the steel box, not for the ledgers this time, for the small things at the bottom, under the folders, the envelope of keepsakes she had carried from house to house and never sorted, because sorting them meant sitting with her mother again, her father's watch, a funeral card from St. Paul's, and a ring of keys she had not touched in 30 years, and on that ring, small and dull and brass, a deposit slot key, the flat kind, the kind that opens one specific drawer in one specific wall of safe deposit boxes, and nothing else in the world. She'd always thought it was her mother's house key. It was too small for a house key. She had simply never asked it what it was. The next morning, she took it back to West 26th, and Mrs. Okafor looked at the brass key and then walked her, without a word, to the back of the credit union, to a quiet room with a steel wall of little doors, and matched the number stamped on the key to a number on a drawer, and turned her own key beside Roberta's, and stepped out, and closed the door so a woman could be alone with her mother. Inside the long metal box on top was a single sheet of paper gone soft at the folds. It was a standing transfer authorization. The bank's old form, the real one, dated 30 years back, a few weeks before Della Macklin went into that county hospital bed. It instructed that any funds arriving at a certain routing number by any path, under any account, name of Voss might later attach to it, be swept, automatically and in full, into the savings account held in the name of Roberta Macklin. It was specific in the cold, permanent way that only her mother and the bank and Roberta herself ever bothered to be specific. And at the bottom, where her father 30 years ago had signed an X over a woman who was not allowed to hold the pen, Della Macklin had signed her own full name, in her own steady hand, the T crossed hard, the way a woman signs when she has decided something and does not intend to be talked out of it. There was a second paper folded beneath it, and Roberta read that one too, and it explained the unlogged transfer at last. It was a note in her mother's hand about a neighbor, a widow 2 doors down the block in those years, a quiet woman left with a controlling man's debts and no door of her own, whom Della had set up the same way, the same maiden name account, the same standing order, so that she would land on her feet no matter what was signed over her. The widow had outlived them all, solvent and stubborn, and when she passed the prior year, her small estate had done what such accounts are built to do. It had found the next woman in the chain. It had found Roberta. The hand that had reached into her door without taking had been her mother's hand, still working 30 years on, through the patient machinery of women who refused to be told what they were allowed to know. Roberta sat in the quiet room with the steel wall of little doors, and she did the arithmetic she had been circling for 3 nights, slowly, the way she did everything until the 2 columns finally, fully agreed. Every dollar Dale had drained out of the joint account in irregular amounts on irregular days had gone to a shadow account 2 suburbs over, and from that shadow account, by a path he had set up himself, without ever reading the fine routing he inherited, when he opened it lazily off an old family number to look clean, the money had been swept onward automatically, under a standing order signed before he ever met her, into the one account he had laughed about for 18 years. He had not hidden the savings from her. He had been depositing them to her on a schedule her dead mother set the whole time. Roberta folded the papers, put them in her bag, and finished at last the breath she felt she had been holding since a man patted the back of her hand and called it kindness. She did not smile. She was not a woman who smiled at money, but she sat a moment longer in the small room with her mother's signature warm against the bottom of her bag, and she thought about a lawyer named Pruitt and a brother named Wayne and a dinner table, and how patient a thing the truth can be when somebody is willing to keep its books. Then she went home to write the page she would read aloud. The page she wrote that night was not long. Roberta had spent 31 years learning that the truth does not need many words. It needs the right ones in the right order, and it needs them to be checkable. She sat at the kitchen table under the hanging light, the steel box open, the green ledgers in their row, and she wrote in the same small, even hand she had used to write everything that ever mattered. She did not write accusations. She wrote dates. She wrote amounts. She wrote a single routing number, and beside it, a name. And the name was her mother's. And beneath that, the name the bank had printed on the inside cover of a passbook before her son was born. When she was finished, she read it back to herself once, low and even, the way she would read it at the table. And then she closed the ledger over the page and turned off the light and went up to bed. And she slept for the first time in 2 years, the whole night through. She called Pruitt's office in the morning. She did not call Dale. She told the young woman who answered that she would like to schedule a meeting to review the financial disclosures before anything was signed, and that she would be bringing documentation, and that she would prefer Dale and his brother to be present so that nothing would have to be repeated. The young woman, hearing only an old woman's politeness, wrote it all down and gave her a day and a time. Thursday, 2 o'clock, the office on State Street with the lake 4 blocks north and the gulls turning over the parking lot. Roberta thanked her and hung up and went to iron the blouse she would wear, because a woman reconciles the world more easily when her own collar is straight. Pruitt's conference room had a long table of dark wood and a window that looked out on State Street and a credenza with a coffee service nobody touched. Dale was already there when Roberta came in, and Wayne beside him, and the smirk Wayne wore was the same smirk he had worn over the pot roast, the smirk of a man who has been told the ending of a story and finds it funny. Dale half rose, the way a man does when he wants the room to see his manners, and he said, "Bobby, you didn't have to make a whole production. We could have done this with a phone call." Roberta set her bag on the table. She took out the green ledger and laid it down flat, and she took out the manila envelope from the credit union and set it beside the ledger, square to its edges, and she took out a single folded sheet gone soft at the creases and set that down too. And then she sat, and she folded her hands, and she said, "I'd like my tea first, if there's hot water." There was not. Pruitt sent the young woman for some. They waited. Wayne's smirk thinned by a degree in the waiting, because a smirk needs an audience that is in a hurry, and nobody at that table was in a hurry anymore except him. When the tea came, Roberta wrapped both hands around the cup and let it warm her fingers, and drank a measure of it down, unbothered, while 4 people watched an old woman drink tea. Then she set the cup on the saucer without a sound, and she opened the ledger to the page she had marked, and she wet the tip of one finger, and she turned to the column. "I'm going to read you some dates," she said. "That's all this is to start. Just dates." And she read them. The 3rd Tuesday in one month and the 2nd Friday in the next, the days with no rhythm that had become, under her finger, a rhythm after all. She read them slowly, in order, her voice low and even, never rising, the voice of a woman calling out figures across a marble counter to a teller who will write them down. Dale shifted in his chair around the fourth date. By the seventh, he had stopped shifting and gone still in the particular way of a man who recognizes the days being read to him because he is the one who chose them. "Now the amounts," Roberta said, and she ran her finger back to the top of the column and came down it a second time, and this time beside each date she read a number: 400, 600, 900. The irregular departures from the joint account on Cherry Street, 2 years of them, each one logged in her hand on the night it cleared, each one matching to the penny a line on the bank statements fanned out of the manila envelope, which she now turned, one at a time, so that Pruitt could see that her green book and the bank's gray paper said the very same thing. "You'll find," she said to Pruitt, not to Dale, "that every figure in my ledger has a twin in the bank's record. I balanced it 3 times. You're welcome to balance it a 4th. Pruitt leaned in. Pruitt, who had studied his pot roast, studied the statements now, and his face began to do the slow arithmetic of a man realizing which side of a table he is actually sitting on. "Now the destination," Roberta said, "because money doesn't vanish. People say a man hid the money and they picture it gone up in smoke under a mattress. It is never gone. It is somewhere, and somewhere has an address." She turned to a page near the back of the ledger where she had written, in the careful column, a single account number at a bank 2 suburbs over in Mill Creek. Every dollar that left the joint account landed here, within a day or two, every time. The same account. 2 years of it. A little over $214,000, which is, I believe, almost exactly the figure that was missing from the page you slid across my dinner table, Dale. The page that said, "I'd be fine on my half of nothing." Wayne's smirk was entirely gone now. Dale said, "That account is mine. That's mine to manage. My name's on those checks, Bobby. Every one of them, 18 years. That's my." And he stopped, because Roberta had raised, not her voice, but one finger, the way she might raise it to mark her place in a column she did not want to lose. "I know whose name is on the checks," she said. "I've never once been confused about whose name is on the checks. You earned it. Nobody at this table is going to tell you that you didn't earn it." She turned the soft-creased single sheet now so that it faced Pruitt, and she smoothed it flat with 2 fingers. "But the account in Mill Creek you opened in a hurry, off an old family routing number because it looked tidy and you didn't read the bottom of it, that account was already spoken for, Dale. It inherited a standing order, a sweep. Anything that lands on that routing number gets carried on, automatically, in full, to one other account. This is the authorization. It's 30 years old. It was signed before you and I ever met." She let Pruitt read it. She watched his eyes go to the bottom of the page, to the line where, 30 years gone, a husband had been handed the pen and a wife had been handed an X, and where instead a woman named Della Macklin had taken the pen herself and signed her own full name. The T crossed hard in the steady hand of a woman who had decided something and did not intend to be talked out of it. "That's my mother," Roberta said. "She died with a man controlling every dollar she ever touched, and before she went, she opened one door that was only hers, and she left it unlocked for me, and she told me to keep my own books even when a man told me not to. People at my dinners thought my books were a joke. Bobby still does math like it's 1985. You said that one yourself, Dale, more than once, and your brother laughed, the way he was laughing on Tuesday." She turned the manila envelope's last paper face up. It was the credit union statement, the maiden name account, the running balance in the right-hand column. So here is where $214,000 actually is. It is not gone. It was never gone. It is in an account at the credit union on West 26th in the name of Roberta Macklin, where it has been arriving a few $100s at a time on the 3rd Tuesday and the 2nd Friday for 2 years. The room was very quiet. The gulls turned over the parking lot 4 blocks from the lake. Roberta lifted her tea, drank the last of it, and set the cup down. "You didn't hide it from me, Dale," she said. "You deposited it for me." Nobody spoke for a moment that went on long enough to become its own kind of confession. Then Pruitt set down the standing order very carefully. The way you set down a thing you have understood is going to cost the man beside you. And he looked at Dale, and he said, in the flat voice of a professional who has just changed his estimate of the afternoon, "Dale, I think you and I need to talk about disclosure. Full disclosure. Because if there's a Mill Creek account that wasn't on your statement to the court, then there's a question about what else wasn't. And there was something else." Roberta had known there would be. The way you know there is one more line at the bottom of a column before you have read it, because the column has to balance, and it does not balance yet. It was the locked room on Cherry Street, the one Dale called storage, the one he kept a key to that did not hang with the others. She had not gone in. She had not needed to. But the forensic review that Pruitt's office opened in the weeks that followed went in for her, on paper where everything has an address. And what it found in Dale's careful disclosures and in the statements he had not meant anyone to read was a second mortgage on a rental property he had never told her existed. Taken out 2 years back, and the 5-figure debt behind it, owed to a man Dale golfed with on Saturdays, a debt that had been quietly eating the household alive from a room with a locked door. That was the fear under all of it. That was why a man stood at dinners and called his wife a pioneer and called her books a joke and slid a single page across a table, not because the money was gone, but because he was terrified of being seen as a man who had lost it. And the only way he knew to not be seen losing was to make sure she was seen losing first. He had moved the money to hide the loss, and every dollar he moved to hide the loss had walked, on a schedule, a dead woman's set, straight into the one pair of hands he had spent 18 years telling not to count. The court took it from there, the way courts do, slowly and on paper, with the second mortgage disclosed now and the Mill Creek account on the record, and a forensic accountant doing, for a fee, the work Roberta had done for free at her own kitchen table by hand. She did not have to raise her voice once in any of it. She had already said everything she needed to say in order, with the amounts beside the dates and the name beside the routing number, and the page she read aloud at Pruitt's table became the spine of everything that followed, because it balanced, and a thing that balances cannot be argued with for long. But that is not the part Roberta carried home with her. The part she carried home was Mrs. Okafor and the credit union on West 26th and a door already open. Because a few weeks after the meeting on State Street on an ordinary Tuesday, Roberta drove back to West 26th, and she did not go to settle anything of her own. She went and she sat down at the far window where the long-time customers drift, and Mrs. Okafor put on the reading glasses on the beaded chain, and Roberta said she'd like to open an account, a savings account, a new one, in the name of a woman 2 doors down from Cherry Street, whom Roberta had been watching for a while now the way her mother once watched the whole neighborhood, a younger woman, married to a man who held the checkbook and signed for her and told her not to worry about the numbers, which is the thing they always say right before the numbers become the only thing that matters. In her own name, Roberta said. Only hers, the way you do. Mrs. Okafor looked at her over the reading glasses, and that same thing crossed her face again. The thing that was not surprise, but recognition. The look of one woman handing a key to another down a line that had started before either of them was born. "The way Della did," she said. "The way Della did," Roberta said. And then Mrs. Okafor did a thing Roberta had not expected. She reached under the counter, past the rubber stamps and the cup of pens chained to nothing, and she brought up a green cloth book, brand new, the spine uncracked, the cover the exact shade of the 18 years stacked in the steel box on top of Roberta's refrigerator. She set it down on the counter between them and rested her palm flat on the cover for a moment, the way a person rests a hand on something that has more weight than its weight. "I keep a few of these back here now," she said. "Have for a long while." Your mother bought me my first one the same week she sat me down at this window and made me put my name on a passbook with nobody else's name beside it. I thought it was just a notebook. I told her so. She said it was a place to write down what was true on the night it was true, so that no one could come along later and tell me it had happened some other way. Mrs. Okafor's reading glasses had slid down on the beaded chain, and she looked at Roberta over the top of them. Two women on either side of a counter on West 26th in the gray afternoon light that comes off the lake in Erie, even when the lake is 4 blocks away and you cannot see it. I balanced groceries in that book for a year before I trusted it. Then I balanced a car. Then I balanced the down payment on the house on Raspberry Street, where my grandchildren sleep now. Della Macklin handed me a notebook, and I have never once let a man close it for me. Roberta took the green book. She turned it over in her hands, felt the give of the unbroken spine, opened it to the first page where the faint blue rules ran clean and empty across the paper, waiting. "Then this one isn't mine," Roberta said. "I've got mine. This one's for the girl in the greenhouse on Cherry 2 doors up from ours. Kayla. Her husband does the signing. He stands in the yard on a Saturday and tells the neighbors she's no good with figures, and he laughs when he says it, the way they laugh, and she stands a little behind him and laughs too because she's been taught that laughing along is the same as agreeing and that agreeing is the same as peace." Roberta closed the book over her thumb. "It isn't peace. It's just quiet." I knew the difference at her age, and I let myself forget it for 18 years. And I would like for her to not have to learn it the way I did at a dinner table, with a brother smirking and a lawyer studying his plate. So they opened the account, Mrs. Okafor took the new card and the maiden name forms, and she filled them slowly the way the older customers like it filled, reading each line aloud, and where the form left a blank for a second signer. She drew a single firm line through it, and she turned the form so Roberta could see the line, and neither of them said anything about the line because it said itself. A savings account, in Kayla's own name, only Kayla's. The deposit that opened it small enough that no one's husband would notice it, and large enough that the door would not swing shut again for lack of use. And into the new green book, on the first ruled line of the first page, Mrs. Okafor wrote the date and the amount and the word deposit in block capitals. And then she capped the pen and handed both the book and the passbook across the counter to Roberta to carry the 2 doors up Cherry Street and put into the hands they belonged to. That was the widening of it, though no one in that credit union would have used a word so large. It was only this, a drawer behind a teller's counter on West 26th in Erie that held a small stack of green cloth books, and a woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain who had been keeping that drawer stocked for years, ever since a customer named Della had shown her what the drawer was for. There was the widow on Raspberry, the one Della had quietly set up a long time back, who was solvent now and did not know to thank a dead woman for it. There was Mrs. Okafor herself, whose grandchildren slept in a house she had balanced into being one grocery receipt at a time. And now there would be Kayla, who did not yet know that a line had been drawn through the blank where a second signer goes, who would find out one ordinary day that there was a door already open with only her name on it, the way Roberta had found out, the way the widow on Raspberry had found out. Each of them handed not a speech about freedom, but a notebook and an account and a teller who would read the lines aloud. And there was the matter of Dale, which the law was still turning over slowly in its hands, the way the law does. The forensic review Pruitt's office had opened did not stop at the Mill Creek account. It went into the locked room he called storage, on paper, where the second mortgage lived, and the 5-figure debt to the man he golfed with on Saturdays at the club out past the airport, and a small constellation of other small concealments that a frightened man makes when he has decided that the worst thing in the world is to be seen as the one who lost it. The court would settle that. Roberta did not need to be in the room for the settling. She had read her column once, in order, at a long, dark table on State Street, and the column had balanced. and a thing that balances does not require its keeper to raise her voice ever again. She let Dale keep the joint account he had bled white and hidden behind, the empty one he had slid across her dinner table like a verdict, because the emptiness had always been the point, and the emptiness was honestly his now. Everything that had left it had walked, on a dead woman's standing instruction, into hands he had spent the better part of 2 decades telling not to bother themselves with numbers. He had been so certain her name was only paperwork. He had said as much, more than once, the phrase tossed off the way men toss off the thing they are most wrong about. It turned out to be the hinge the whole house swung on. Roberta drove home from West 26th the long way, down past the lake, at the foot of the streets where the wind comes up over the break wall and rattles the bare trees, even in summer, the way it does in Erie, the way it had rattled them the whole of her girlhood. She parked the car on Cherry Street in front of the brick twins she had lived in for 30 years and would, the lawyers now agreed, go on living in. She walked the green book and the pass book 2 doors up first before she went to her own door, and she knocked. And when Kayla opened it with the cautious half-smile of a young woman who has learned to read a face before she commits to her own, Roberta did not make a speech. She held out the book and the pass book, and she said, "These are yours. Nobody's name on them but yours. There's a woman at the credit union on West 26th named Mrs. Okafor who'll show you how to keep it. You don't have to tell anybody you have it. You don't have to explain it to a soul. You just write down what's true on the night it's true." And she watched the girl's hand close around the cover, slow, the way her own had once closed around the first green book a teller slid across a counter, and she saw the thing move behind the girl's eyes that was not quite understanding yet, but would be in a year, in a car, in a down payment, in a door that did not swing shut. Then she went home. The kitchen was the same as it had always been, the wall calendar with the squares she filled in pen. The church bulletin held under a magnet on the refrigerator, gone soft at one corner from the heat of the stove. The steel filing box back up on top of the refrigerator where it had lived for 18 years, holding the 18 years. Every transfer logged on the night it cleared in a small, even hand. Every figure with a twin somewhere in a bank's gray records, balanced 3 times, balanced a 4th time when a lawyer asked. She did not need the box tonight. She'd carried the proof and set it down, line by line, and the proof had done its work, and the work was finished. She filled the kettle and set it on the burner and waited for it the way she had waited for 10,000 kettles, hands quiet on the counter, the blue tick of the flame the only sound in the house. She made the tea. She let it steep the full time, never a minute short, because a thing done in a hurry is a thing done twice. She carried the cup to the table under the hanging light, and she sat down in the chair she always sat in, and she drank it down slow, all of it, to the leaves at the bottom, the way she drank it when there was nothing left that needed answering. When the cup was empty, she set it on its saucer without a sound, and then she reached to the chair beside her, where she had laid one more green cloth book, the last from the drawer Mrs. Okafor had sent home with her, its spine uncracked, its cover the color of every year she had ever kept honest. Not for Kayla, not for the widow on Raspberry, for herself, the next 18 years of herself, the quiet, honest table she had wanted all along and had finally, by patience and by arithmetic, made. She opened it to the first page. The blue rules ran clean across the paper. Waiting, she wet the tip of her pen and wrote the date at the top of page 1. Her books are always open.